I'll take my cue from you.
We'll have an automatic clicker, so just
Yeah.
tell Josh next slide and he'll click to the next slide.
Okay. All right. Are we good to go?
We're good to go.
Oh. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Long-time member or someone just passing through looking to learn about some cool plants. My name is Christopher Dail. I've been with the group for a little over a year now, I think. And then I've been growing today's subject, the rainbow plants, for, in truth, only about half a year. But in half a year, learned quite a bit. There's not a whole lot of information known about them because they're so rare in cultivation. There's probably less than 1,000 people in the planet that grow these guys. They're just that rare. Okay. Okay, so first off, what are they? So Byblis are part of the sticky trap class of carnivorous plants, so similar to like sundews, Drosophilum, butterworts, Stylodium technically. And unlike all of the others, the entire plant is coated in the sticky tentacles and is carnivorous. So even the flowers, the only thing that is not carnivorous is the flower petals. Every other part of the plant, well, except for the roots, are capable of catching and digesting insects that they catch. The flowers are bilaterally symmetrical, which is unique to them. Actually, I think Drosophilum, the dewy pines, have that too. But sundews are radially symmetrical. This means for Byblis, you cut down the flower in half. That's the only way to get them to look the same. If you do a sundew that way, it will not, no matter how you cut it. And then all of them, they produce very tall, erect stems. Depending on the species, some of them will flop over and need some extra support. Usually those ones grow in areas that get a lot of competing grasses. We'll get into that a little later. And then there are two forms of glands on them. First, there's the ones on the end of stalks. Those are what actually capture the insects. They then pull the insect to onto the surface of the leaf or stem, and that's where the digestive juices are secreted to consume them. There's only 8 recognized species. There's probably a few more, but there just isn't anyone to do the taxonomic work to separate them out. 2 of them are perennial, the rest are annual species. And I'll get into the distinctions with when I get to the species profiles. So, they get their name, the name Byblis comes from the tale of the daughter of a Greek goddess who turned into a fountain out of heartbreak of not being able to be with her beloved. Due to there being children here, I'm not going to go into specifics on why it was frowned upon. You can look that up on your own. Australian Aborigines, all these plants grow in Australia, with one exception that can be also found in Papua New Guinea. So the Aborigines of Australia tell legends of thickets of them able to catch birds and other small animals. I do not believe that for a second. Maybe if you had like a 150-meter thick wall of these plants, you could maybe catch a hummingbird, but that's not likely. In truth, the largest prey I've seen these guys catch are small moths. And then the first species was characterized by botanist Richard Anthony Salisbury of Britain. In 1808, he described Liniflora, and then also he was the one to describe Gigantea, which is one of the perennials. you can see right here. And then they were completely ignored for the most part until the later part of the 1900s, when botanist Alan Lowry, who is well known for describing quite a few carnivorous plant species, especially the tuberous sundews, the pygmy sundews, and of course Byblis. He's the one who went and figured out which ones were their own species. He also was responsible for getting most of them into cultivation by sending seeds out to people in different countries. Unfortunately, he died, I think it was 20 years ago. So there's no more, and no one's taken up the mantle of looking at some of these species and figuring out if they are, in fact, separate. And then the common name rainbow plant comes from how the light refracts through the dew. You'll see in a couple of pictures of that in the presentation a little later. So originally, they were thought to be protocarnivores, which means that they capture insects but do not digest them on their own. This is because constant experiments couldn't find the digestive enzymes. So if you can't find those, you can't prove it's actually digesting anything. They were also thought to be passive traps, where something would get stuck on there and it wouldn't move at all to put them to the leaf surface. We now know this to be inaccurate. In 2005, there was some experiments done that proved that it does produce digestive enzymes and has active carnivory. The problem that most researchers had, they weren't looking at the right time. They only move and they only produce digestive enzymes at night, and only from the underside of the leaves. So you'll see in the morning, you'll see most of the insects move to the underside of leaves or the stems, and that's how you know that they're actually moving. It was an interesting experiment. They took photographic film and they put it on the underside of the leaf, and the digestive acids eat away at a coating on the film. So then they developed the film, and where there were holes, you knew that there was digestive acids at work. Okay. And then another reason why people thought that they were protocarnivores is because they have a symbiotic relationship with assassin bugs from the Psittacoris genus. And there's another protocarnivore called the flybush in South Africa, Rorigula, that's well known for definitely not producing any digestive enzymes, but it has a similar species of assassin bug that lives on it that doesn't get caught. They feed on prey that gets captured, they defecate on the plant, and the plant is able to get nutrition from that poop. People thought that was the same thing with these guys, but it turns out that it's just a opportunistic symbiosis. The bugs don't have to hunt for food, and the plants still have easier access to the nutrients from the poop of the assassin bugs than it does in trying to digest the insects on its own. And what's interesting about these guys is the few people that have managed to get them out of Australia, they'll lay eggs on the plants in the fall, overwinter as eggs, and come back year after year as long as you don't spray them with any sort of pesticide. And they'll also move to other sticky carnivorous plants, and they don't get caught by them. So sundews or butterworts, you can find these guys running around on them, no issue, just completely ignoring the glue. That's kind of a cool thing to think about. I haven't been able to find anyone or any source to get these bugs myself for my own collection, but it's definitely something I'll keep an eye out for. The green ones are nymphs. The black one you see in the upper left, that's an adult. Okay, next. So the soil requirements, the typical 50-50 peat moss to sand is closest to their natural environment. They live in very sandy areas. You'll see pictures of in situ pretty soon. And a lot of the annual species are actually not very picky. You can grow them in almost any carnivorous plant mix, whether you're using peat, perlite, pumice. A lot of people grow them alongside their butterworts, as you can see in the picture here, and they do just fine. So oftentimes I found a lot of them popping up in my Sarracenia pots this spring, which is kind of a nice little surprise. But they'll take a lot, they'll go in a lot of soil mixes that you can come up with, as long as there's no nutrients, although that might actually be dubious. I'll be talking about that in the future slide. The perennial species are a bit different. They grow in very sandy, very well-draining environments, similar to Drosophilum as well as Cephalotus, the Australian pitcher plant. So they like things a bit more free-draining, less peat. And then it should also be noted that you should not repot them if you can help it, except for the perennials. In other countries, they'll use ericaceous compost in mixes with them. I've never seen it here. It's a compost for acid-loving plants. And I can't speak to using it myself, but I thought I'd throw that in there. So yeah, so repotting. Annuals, do your best not to repot. You'll want to sow seeds in wherever you want to keep them. If you are going to repot them, you need to do them when they're small. This is a perfect example of the maximum size. If they get bigger than that, I would not repot it. If you repot it and you if you expose a root or damage it, the plant's going to die. There's no salvaging it. So what I've done for the ones that I've got in the back is I use forceps. I pinch around a large clump of the soil mixture around it, and then I lift it up. The risk with it getting too big is if the root's too long, you do that, root breaks, it's done. Perennials are different. You can only really repot them in the early spring when they start to regrow after winter. And you ideally don't want to disturb the roots too much. I just picked them up, took it out, I removed a little bit of soil from the top, and then I put them in the new pot. But they won't necessarily die from having their roots exposed. It'll just set them back for like a month or two of no growth. I should also mention that the annuals, even if you're as careful as you can be, they'll usually stop growing for about a month. Let's see. Nope. Next one. So, water and humidity. The annuals, they like very hot tropical conditions. Any of you grow lowland nepenthes, that would be their ideal. The humidity isn't 100% necessary. I grow all of mine out here in Temecula, which is very low humidity and a lot of heat. They do not like cold conditions. It shortens the lifespan, and they usually don't produce flowers if it's too cold. They also, I found, the flowers don't necessarily open if it's too cold. So you'll get the flowers coming up, but they won't open up if it's not warm enough. The perennial, good example, this is a Liniflora growing in a flooded basin. They're found, most of the annuals are found in the northern part of Australia. That's very tropical. They get huge monsoonal rains through, so they like it wet. They don't want to be sitting, in like this deep of water, except for one species. But there's a lot of exceptions for these plants. But they do need a lot of, they do want water. They want it free draining, but they do need constant access to water. The perennials, they will actually go dormant if they dry out, especially during the summer when it's hot. The leaves will die back to the woody stems, and they'll wait for the rain to come back, and that way they grow back is actually one of the ways you can differentiate the two species. So when I get to the species profiles, I'll bring this back up. And then the perennials are not huge fans of high humidity. They actually grow around the city of Perth, which is almost the exact same climate as here, which makes it nice for us to easily grow them. They do, ideally you want to prevent water from getting on the leaves. They look miserable afterwards. It seems to break the mucilage up and can cause them to dehydrate. If you do it during a very hot day, that could potentially kill them because they just can't keep the water within the leaves for whatever reason. So if you're going to mist them, make sure you do it only at night. Okay. Also, do not top water seedlings for the same reason. The seedling's just going to get completely covered in water if you top water, and that's going to kill it. Okay, next. So light and temperature, I mentioned earlier the refracting of the light through. Here's a good example of some of the perennials. So I grow all of mine outdoors in full sun right here. They're perfectly happy with our environment, and they love as much light as you can give them. Some of the species will actually turn red if given bright enough light. If you grow them indoors or on a windowsill or under lights, they usually want a 14-hour light cycle with as much light as you can give them. The one I've got back there on that table, that's kind of the result of not having enough light. You can see it was growing under a couple of other specimens. Yeah, go ahead. The one with the stick. So that one was growing with a couple others in there that recently died. I didn't even know it was there until I cleared away the stems of the old ones, but it was getting shaded out. So that's why it's really elongated. It's not branched at all. Well, it kind of looks a little sickly, but it should bounce back pretty quickly after this point. And then all the species love heat. They want, if you can give 80 to low 90s every day, and keep the temperatures above like 65 to 70 at night, these things will grow into bushes. They'll be so happy and loaded with flowers. And then the perennials, you do need to be careful with the temperatures with the perennials, because when it gets cold, if you are keeping them in the tray system and they're getting too much water, they can rot. Similar to how dewy pines grow for those of you who grow those. So you have to be careful during the winter time about that. And then I think that's about it for this slide. So feeding. These are the most voracious carnivorous plants out there. They want to eat as much as they can, and the more they eat, the faster they grow, and the more flowers you'll get. For me, the common prey species that I get are a lot of mosquitoes, winged aphids, and then later in the summer, fruit flies. You can take a look on these plants when I bring them back there. They're loaded with mosquitoes. And I don't normally have a problem with mosquitoes around my house. I don't know where they're coming from. No, there's nowhere for them to reproduce around my house, and no one gets bit, but definitely mosquitoes. So unlike most other carnivores, you can actually fertilize them pretty readily. I use quarter strength Maxi, which is kind of the gold standard for carnivorous plants. Orchid fertilizers can work as well at a similar strength. And unlike other carnivorous plants, you can feed them through the roots. So usually for most carnivores, doing that is akin to putting napalm on them. But for these guys, they love it. It might be worth an experiment to try growing them with like Miracle-Gro peat moss. There's one grower that I know of who's kind of one of the big people for this genus here in the US, John End. He actually did grow one filifolia specimen in Miracle-Gro peat moss, as well as the typical perlite, and that thing grew into a freaking bush. It was like a small pot to up to here. So these are kind of the exception to the idea that carnivorous plants can't handle any nutrients in the soil. These guys seem to love it. Osmocotes are another option, putting one osmocote pellet per plant within in the soil next to the roots. I haven't tried that myself, and I've heard some people say that that's resulted in death, but some people swear by it, so I'm presenting it to you guys that way. If you're going to do foliar feeds, only spray them at night, as I said before. And then if you don't want them to grow as big or as tall, feed them less. The more you feed them, the faster and bigger they will grow. And that is not an understatement. Next. So for diseases, they're pretty resilient to most things because almost every millimeter of the plant is capable of catching and digesting insects. Their biggest threat, aphids can sometimes attack during the winter because they don't produce as much of the glue. So I've heard of some people having that issue. Mealybug and scale will sometimes attack the base, the woody stem part, where there's no risk of getting digested. I have had that on one specimen, but I've spotted it and cleared it just physically. Slugs are a threat to young plants. I've heard of some people having that. I haven't had that issue personally. And then fungus is the biggest threat. So for seedlings, a big cause of mortality of seedlings is damp-off fungus. One of the main ways that we get around that is it's a good idea to sow seeds on milled sphagnum like you would do for like Nepenthes or some other carnivorous plants. During this, if you're going to try do it this time of year, you probably don't need to do that because it's warm enough that the seedlings should be able to fight off the fungus without issue. And then for the annuals, usually fungus is what finishes them off. They start to get kind of sickly towards the end of their lifespan when it gets cold, and their immune system starts to fail, and usually fungus is what finishes them. That or frost. So propagation, this is the biggest hindrance to why these are not more common in captivity. So almost all Byblis require fire in order to actually have their seeds germinate, similar to our redwoods and giant sequoias. They have specific chemicals within the seed that prevent germination that are broken down by chemicals produced in smoke. So luckily, we do have ways around it. So one of the most common ones, and it's one that I've used, is the use of gibberellic acid, which is a plant hormone that forces water through seed membranes. So we're basically trying to just flood the seed in order to get past the chemicals that are inhibiting it from germinating. And almost every species requires this. Leniflora and Aquatica are exceptions, where they will grow just with water. They grow further north, basically at the tips. Those are also the ones that exist in Papua New Guinea. So they don't necessarily need the smoke treatment or the gibberellic acid treatment. Some people use liquid smoke like you could buy for flavoring meats and stuff like that, and that's had some good results. Some people have built little fires on top of their pots, and they'll light that up and just burn it, and that'll do it. Then you water it to get the chemicals into the seeds. There was smoke discs like you'd use for drinks. You would have to add smoke into it. That's also been done. Do not use bleach. There is a treatment for the seeds that has gone around for quite a while that kind of needs to die out. It's the use of a dilute solution of bleach to supposedly do it. It does not work. It's dangerous. You can very easily burn yourself if you try it. You'll likely kill all the seeds. You might get one or two, but those one or two probably would have germinated with regular water anyway. And then you can also, there are some examples of using stem cuttings to get new plants. So like you can see how you have an offshoot. This won't work for, you would just cut it right there. You would dip it in a rooting hormone, put it in long fiber sphagnum, and within 1 to 2 weeks, they're pretty quick, they'll produce roots and start growing. These plants are a lot faster than almost any other carnivore. It's pretty impressive. And then for the picture, these are what some of the seed pods look like. For all of them, the seeds are produced pretty quickly after pollination, usually within 2 to 3 months, depending on the species. Should also be noted that you need to be active about collecting the seeds because the seed pods will dry up. I don't have an example to show you. And then they'll pop open and the seeds will spill out very quickly. Like you'll look at the seed pods the night before and think, no, maybe I have a couple days. You wake up in the morning, go to check it, it's popped open, the seeds are all gone. They've all gone into the soil. So you have to be active about it. What I do is I'll find ones that I think are close. I'll squeeze them slightly. There's a little crease that'll open up if they're almost ready and you can see the black seeds in. I'll just take the pod off right then and just put it in a plastic bag or a container for it to dry out and open up on its own. So that way I lose a lot less of the seeds. Oh.
Cutting method where you throw it in long fiber sphagnum box.
Yeah.
Have you successfully repotted into the preferred media without damaging?
You don't.
Okay.
It's just the long fiber sphagnum helps to ensure the proper growing. A lot of people have had good luck with that. One other thing I should mention about doing it that way, it tends to produce plants with linkier stems. So like pretty similar to Nepenthes, where if you do the vine cutting, it'll usually go right to vining right away instead of having the rosette sort of state. So you'll eventually get very lanky plants that don't look quite as good, in my opinion. So it's usually better to do it from seed. And for the annuals, the plant's still going to die come winter. So the only reason I would ever do that is if I only had one specimen of a species, so I wasn't able to cross-pollinate it, which I'll get to right now. So in order to preserve it, especially with some of the rarer species, so that might be the only way to go about keeping them going until you can get a second specimen to cross-pollinate. Okay, so.
Get the gibberellic acid.
So I buy mine from Turlock Carnivorous, who sells it in amounts that are ready to go. I'll get into the specific concentrations when I get to the species pages. So all of them need to be buzz pollinated. Usually this is done by bees. Not our bees. I saw one bee once land on a flower of Byblis, landed on there, its back legs started to get stuck because it reached around too far back, and it did not like that, and I never saw another bee touch these flowers again. So you kind of have to do it manually. So, and I'll be doing a demonstration of this after this presentation, so you can all see how I do it. So you need to use something that vibrates to induce the pollen to release. You go to the yellow stamens, vibrate that, you'll get a puff of pollen hopefully, and then you have to move to the flower of a different plant for all but 2 species, which I'll mention very soon. You put it on the pistils. You can kind of see the little white filaments with the little purple head. That's what you put it on that, and then within a day or so, the flower will usually close up, fall off, and then it'll start working on the seeds. And then I'm showing a bunch of these are flowers of different locales for the various species. So you can see there's a lot of variation with these plants. And depending on, and you can always, if there's a particular flower up there you like, you can search out the locality. There was something else I wanted to talk about. Oh, maybe it'll come back to me later, next. Okay, so now we're going to get into the species themselves. So we'll start with the annuals, as these are the most commonly available. This is Leniflora, which is probably the easiest to grow. I've got several of them back there. There are 6 species. They like it hot and tropical. 2 of them are self-fertile. The rest need to be cross-pollinated. All of them except Leniflora, you do have to manually pollinate them. Even for the ones that are that can self, you do have to manually do it yourself. You might get 1 or 2 seeds if you just leave them to their own devices. But if you want more than that, which you probably are going to want to, you got to manually pollinate them. You can grow them outdoors from late spring through early winter. I actually grew a couple over the winter and they never looked good. They didn't grow that fast. They didn't open flowers. They just didn't look good. Those were indoors. Most need the GA3 treatment, the gibberellic acid. For the gibberellic acid treatment for annuals, 500 parts per million is the concentration you want. And then you want to soak the seeds for 1 to 2 days. Usually what you'll do is you'll take like a paper towel or a cotton sponge or something like that, soak it in the solution, put the seeds in, close it up, and just leave it in a Ziploc bag for 1 to 2 days. You'll open it up. If it worked, you'll see blue around the seeds. That's evidence that the acid has penetrated, which is a good way to tell that it's worked. If you leave them for too long, the gibberellic acid can actually damage the seed. So you don't want to just think, it might be better just leave it for a week. No, 1 to 2 days. And then the flowers for these guys, they last about a month, sometimes more if you haven't pollinated them. If you pollinate them, the flowers will die off very quickly as they go into making the seeds. But they last a long time. What's interesting is also they will open during the day and they'll close again at night. So you can go and you'll check after the sun goes down and all the flowers are closed up. In the morning, they'll all be open. And the fact that the flowers last so long is why you see a lot of these plants with so many flowers. If you want to just enjoy the plant like that, just don't pollinate them. Sustained cold will kill them very quickly. So I had a couple that survived from last year's batch. Had a couple that survived through January, and then the first frost killed them off.
What temperature is too cold?
Daytime's under 70 degrees. These are tropical annuals. At that point, they usually stop growing new leaves, and they'll start producing a whole bunch of flowers in a last-ditch effort to create seed. And so they'll look pretty good, but then over time, it'll just stay like that for like a month, and then it'll start just dying off. It'll become very thin, sickly. Usually by that point, your last batch of seeds will have been finished, so you collect those, and then just let it go. And then, yeah, they flower themselves to death when the temperatures start to drop. There is some evidence that you could potentially make them last more than 1 year. The key is preventing any sort of temperature variation. So if you have like a tropical grow chamber, you might be able to pull it off, especially with a couple of species, namely Filifolia and Gehuai, because they actually will produce some woody stems. There's also some thought that there might be some type locales for some of these species that are perennial in places that are very hard to access. You just need someone to go and verify that, basically, to go out into the Australian bush, brave the snakes and spiders and everything. But for what we have available, they don't really seem to survive more than 1 year. Again, if you want to try the experiment, if you have the growth chamber, just keep cutting off the flowers as they make them. You might be able to get it to go more than a year. So Leniflora we'll start with. So Leniflora has, like quite a few of them, but especially Leniflora, has the interesting growth habit of throwing all of its leaves straight down to look like a Christmas tree, which is rather nice. It's thought that that's used to help pull itself above grasses that might be competing with it for sunlight. It's very easy to grow. I'd say it's easier than Drosera capensis, which is usually the go-to starter plant for most people. It is self-fertile. It'll actually produce a couple of seeds per pod usually, even if you don't pollinate it yourself. But if you want the most seeds, you want to definitely do the pollination. They don't really get much taller than 6 inches. When grown outside, they usually don't get above 4. But they usually are a bit more sturdy when grown outside. And then the flowers are usually between pink and purple. Aquatica, which is my personal favorite, it grows for a good chunk of its lifetime underwater. In this picture, this is actually after the waters have receded. You can see the stem going all the way back there. That's because it was rooted, and the water was all the way up to here, so I had to grow the stem really long to reach the top and come out of the water. Ironically, in cultivation, it does not do well in that kind of situation. In fact, it prefers things a little drier for whatever reason when we try to grow it. It's probably an oxygenation thing because these are growing in streams and usually slow-moving streams and fed by rainwater, so there's probably a lot of oxygen. So that could be it. And then usually the plants are red, which is a very attractive trait. You can see it somewhat in the top right. They also have the deepest purple for the flowers of any of the species. They have the weird habit of having the flowers close to the stem, almost like they're just holding them against themselves, especially after they've been pollinated. The seed pods, they usually pull the seed pod back closer to the stem for whatever reason. And then unlike the others, the seed pods only will open when exposed to water. So they're waiting for the rains to come along to distribute the seeds, and then they start to grow. This is also one of the only other ones. Leniflora and Aquatica are the only ones that don't need the gibberellic acid treatment. But it definitely helps with Aquatica to get better germination if you do use it, but it's not 100% necessary. You could end up waiting, a couple months before they'll pop without the gibberellic acid, but it's not a hard necessity. Next. Byblis florida. So this one, it's a little less common in people's collections. Its main claim to fame is the serrated flower tips. They also have the largest of the sessile digestive glands of any of the species. The flowers are the main way to tell them apart from Leniflora, which is closely related to. It does hybridize pretty well with Leniflora. It's also interesting is that the tentacles on the back of the flower do not produce any of the glue. So it just looks like a spiky protective wall behind the flower. It's the only one that does that. Okay, next. Okay, so Byblis filifolia. Now we're getting into the next group. Filifolia and gehuai are the larger of the annual species. Filifolia grows more erect, gets very tall, kind of bushy. It does branch, but not as much as its close relative. There's a huge range of flower colors. I've seen white in one person's collection. That was a grower in Japan who sold them for like hospitals. You know how you go to hospitals and you buy like a plant to give to people, stuff like that. Over there, this guy would sell these for that, which was kind of interesting. And he had some incredible specimens. You saw some of them earlier in the presentation, but he retired, and those lines have been lost, unfortunately. So with heavy feeding, they become very bushy. They hold a lot of flowers, as you can see, which is always nice to look at. Okay, next. Gehuai, which I think has the most potential for a lot of different grow methods. It's the most heavily branching species. It does not hold itself up very well without support, so it'll just scramble along the ground unless you put it up. I intend to try to achieve this using a tomato cage around my main pot of them. I think that they would look really good in a hanging pot, especially if you put multiple specimens. You could just have just this basket of sticky stems and flowers coming down. The flowers are smaller than filifolia, most of the clones. It has a huge range. This one's we do have. Turlock Carnivorous has a white strain that he's working on producing larger numbers of, which looks really nice, especially when put side to side with the others. If well fed, it turns into a bush. And then like Aquatica, under very strong light, it'll turn red as well, which is very nice. Like you can see it in some of the specimens I've got back there for sale. I also think that this one potentially does not necessarily need the gibberellic acid treatment. It's probably best for getting the best germination. But this spring I had a whole bunch of these pop up in some of my other pots that I know I did not treat the seeds. So I'm going to actually, later on tonight, I'm going to be taking a couple of seeds of this, just going to soak them in water for about a week and see if I can get germination that way. If so, that'd be great because it's just another species that's much easier to germinate and keep them going. Next. Pilbarana. This is the most recent described species. Grows out in what might as well be Australia's version of Death Valley. It's a pure desert. I couldn't find any good pictures that didn't also look like, you know, the Badlands of Utah. It's just all sand, sandstone, with trickles of water coming in from the coastline. They're the smallest species in the wild. They don't get much bigger than this. They just grow in just this ultra hot desert with a ton of sun. They turn red under very strong light. One thing that is very unique to them, they hold their flowers upright above the plant. So they'll just have them flat up, just holds them up there until they get pollinated, then they come down. It's one of the rarest in cultivation because Lowry wasn't around a whole lot longer after doing this, so he sent seed out to a few places. Most people ended up losing it because for whatever reason, it's a little more difficult to keep. It wants a lot less water in its soil, like just barely moist, so a little too much water and it'll rot. This is not a beginner plant. And then seed production is apparently a bit more difficult, and germination can be a bit more difficult as well for whatever reason. It's most of these plants have only been in cultivation for like 50, 60 years, so we're still learning a ton about them through trial and error. And this is one of the harder species to do trial and error because people keep losing them. Next. All right, the perennials, the big boys, what you see right here. So You want to keep them a little drier than the annuals during the summer. Keeping them wet is still the ideal thing, but when winter comes around, let them dry out a bit. They can go dormant during the summer if they end up drying out. So if you forget to water them, you can just wait a month or so and then water them again, and they'll come back. The flowers last a lot less, much shorter time, only about a week. I'm very happy that I have enough flowers to do a pollination demonstration after this. I was worried I wouldn't. And then the seeds take about 3 months to mature. The seeds are a lot larger than most of the annuals. Aquatica is pretty big, but these ones are a lot bigger. For the germination, you need to soak them in 1,000 ppm of the gibberellic acid for about a week. And even then, it might still take a little while to get them to germinate. Sometimes it can take a couple months after. But usually within about a month is what I've had my luck with. And then during the winter, they kind of turn a sickly yellow. You can see that on some of the lower leaves. It doesn't mean that the plant is sick. That's just what they do. Okay, next. So Byblis gigantea, this is the most common one in cultivation for the perennials. Gets to very large size. This one's only about a year old. This one I germinated, I think, in November. So an idea, they do grow very quickly. They're native to the southern part of Perth in very sandy seasonal swamps. So when the monsoons come through, it just loads it up with water. These things grow, they produce seed, then they die back to their roots when everything dries out. They grow back from their base, not the woody stem. They just abandon all the growth above the soil when they go dormant. They can reach about 3 feet in height, which is a pretty good size, especially for most carnivorous plants. There's definitely no sundews or any of the other stickies that can get that big. And then an unfortunate note is they're likely to go extinct in the wild during our lifetime. This is because of the expansion of the city of Perth is covering up a lot of the land that they use. There are apparently some places in the city where you can find them growing out from between cracks in the sidewalk and stuff where they've managed to somehow pull through. But because there's no fires to go through, cities actively discourage fires to go through. You may not necessarily believe that after the situation up in LA, but usually they try to prevent fires. So without the fires, the seeds are not going to grow. So when those plants die, that's going to be it, unfortunately. Luckily, this one is a lot more common in captivity than the other one, which is still doing okay in the wild. And I say much more available. They're still pretty rare. Typically, prices for these will go between $80 to $200 a piece, if you can find them. There is one on the raffle table, so buy your raffle tickets if you want to try. And then next. Then Lamellata is the other perennial species. The main way to identify them from Gigantea is to use, you have to look at the seeds under the microscope. Lamellata has these lamellet protrusions on the seeds that Gigantea lacks. That's the easiest way to identify. They grow north of Perth in a much larger range. They grow on very deep, sandy, well-draining soils. So in cultivation, they like things a lot drier than Gigantea. This has contributed to it being a lot rarer in captivity because a lot of people just have them rot out. And then for an idea of the environment, you can find a place that looks like that over the hill over there. They like drier areas that just get a ton of rain during the monsoon season, and that's how they grow. Like Gigantea, they get several feet tall and wide. They're more branching than Gigantea is. So but in truth, Gigantea does produce a lot of branches still. So that's not a very good way of telling which one is which. But when they come back after dormancy, they grow back from the woody stem. So unlike Gigantea, which only comes back from the base, it'll come back from the ends of the stem and continue growing as it was before, which is kind of a nice quality. Okay, next. So there is hybrids of these. Mostly they've been with Liniflora and a couple of the other annual species. Not all of them work, but quite a few of them are fertile on their own. And in truth, I found Liniflora crossrorita to be pretty resilient. That's the one that lasted up into February for me this year without looking too bad. The frost is actually what killed it instead of the typical petering out. And then the two perennials can readily hybridize. This is a hybrid of Lamellata gigantea. And so is the other one that you see back there. This one's a pure gigantea, so don't need to compare that. And then those are also fertile, so you can back cross them with gigantea if you want. I'm currently trying to cross the two hybrids together, see if I can get successful seeds from that. Time will tell if that will work. And then there's so far been no successful hybridization between a perennial and an annual, which would be the ultimate goal, to try to get some of the annual species to live more than a year. Okay. And then references and acknowledgments, the people I got the information from. There is very little information on these guys out there. This is I just probably covered about 80% of what we know about these plants. So the more people that grow them, the more information we can learn about them, and hopefully we can grow them better and get more out of them.
Thank you.
Any further questions? No? Okay, so I'm going to bring these over there, and those interested in seeing how to pollinate them,